Sawyer in her upcoming dental procedure. We pray for Damon and his recovery, and he find the help that he needs, and you bring him back to full health so we can see him again soon. And we're just thankful for the Children's Business Fair and how fun and successful that was. We pray that we can continue to grow that and have it be a fun event for the community where they can bring them into the church and show them the kindness and love and generosity of your son Jesus. And we pray all these things in his name. Amen. All right. So we are wrapping up our exile class. We got one more class after this. And so I'm very excited about our next class. Not that I wasn't excited about this class, but our next class has been something I've done before with like our small group, where we've kind of done a more like practical application, but it's really built around Christian disciplines, the spiritual disciplines, and so we're going to take a focused look at those and just what role they play in our lives, how they can grow our own spiritual maturity, how they can grow our own ability to become more and more like Jesus. And so I think it's going to be a great class. I want to ask you all to reach out to a few people and say, hey, we're starting this new class. If you're excited about it, tell them you're excited about it. If you're not excited about it, just tell them that they should come, because Thomas is excited about it, I guess. I think it'll be good. The first few classes, it's going to be very practical. It's not going to be super confusing or deep Bible history or anything like that. It's just going to be like, okay, Jesus thinks that these things are important. It's right in the center of his Sermon on the Mount, and so since it's there, we should be attending to it more than we are, and some very practical things on how to get started in those areas.
So will we be looking through the lens?
We're always looking through the lens. Just depends on which lens you're looking through.
Okay.
But today's class, we're going to start by just thinking about Jesus. So today's study is going to be about Jesus and his life of exile. And so I just want us to think about how Jesus takes every story, every human story, whether it's your family's story or our country's story, and he can bring that all into himself, into his story, and redeem things, to transform things, to cleanse things that need to be cleansed. So he's basically, he's the greatest hero. He's the one who has gone to the lowest lows and the worst possible things, to the deepest depths, and then been brought up to the greatest heights. And so, just thinking about his story and how it kind of redeems things. And so, for us, I want us to think about a story that you have that maybe has been redeemed by Jesus, or like you didn't know why you were going through this thing, and then if you were converted later in life, then maybe this is like a story of redemption. Like, oh, I didn't realize why I had gone through that, but now I can see it. Or maybe it's you were hoping and waiting, and then it was redeemed or was changed and transformed in some way. What kind of stories come to your mind in that way? Faithfulness, long faithfulness in the same direction. My grandpa has a similar story. Not that similar. So his wife passed away before he did, and then he was baptized a few months before he passed away. But it seemed like it was kind of a
carry on, you tell that.
No, that's great, and I think it's wonderful to hear testimonies like that, because it's just, a lot of people in the world, even in the church, would look at a story like that and say, this guy is irredeemable, right? It's like, this is impossible to come back from. You can't come back from all these drugs and alcohol and terrible behavior.
Such a bad person, so bad.
But in
So
Jesus,
bad.
it's like he goes through the worst thing. He doesn't even do anything wrong, right? And he's still going through the worst things. And so you would say, okay, Rome has you, the leaders of the temple have you. They're completely corrupt. There's no way out of this, and yet Jesus is redeemed and brought out of all of this. So, if Jesus is raised from the dead, then our stuff is not irredeemable. And so, that's our hope, and that's our praise. So thanks for
I
sharing.
meant to say,
Yeah.
you're looking at Superman in flesh, but wasn't able to outrun the speeding train.
Yeah.
They sang cadences about me for that time. So it's
Sure they
awful,
did.
man.
I can only imagine.
Where you going to in such a hurry, Stickler? You got a train?
That's funny. All right, so last week we talked about the intertestamental period and just saw how all these practices developed. One thing we didn't have time to think about last week was the relationships between the people of Israel and Samaritans and Gentiles. And so just from your awareness, what was that relationship like? How did they interact and think about Gentiles before Jesus comes, or Samaritans? Yeah, so the Good Samaritan is kind of our primary go-to story. But he wasn't a Samaritan, right?
Correct, okay, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah. Well, what's the point of that story?
there was this division.
Yeah, there's this guy that you all hate, and he's the one that does the right things. And you're not. You're priest, you're Levite, the guys that you would expect to do the right thing. They don't do the right thing, but this guy does, and he's the one that's acting like the neighbor to this injured person, right?
Same with Jesus and the woman at the well.
Yep, Samaritan woman at the well. And so, very interesting story. Because what happens at wells? What happens when you meet a woman at the well in the Bible? Yeah, you get married, right? This is the watering hole, right? This is the place where you're gonna find your wife.
Jacob, I just read that this
Yeah,
morning.
yeah, Jacob, Isaac's. So it's Abraham's servant finds Isaac a wife at the well. Moses finds his wife at the well, right? Everybody finds their wife at the well. And so Jesus comes and he finds this woman at the well. And so what are we expecting? Oh, he's about to get married to this lady. But then we find out about this lady. This isn't the lady you want to marry, right? Not only is she a Samaritan, but she's got a lot going on, right? She's got all these husbands, and all these things, and it's like it's a bad situation. And so, but Jesus doesn't go into the town with his disciples so he can have this interaction and relationship with this woman, which turns her life around, and then she becomes the first person to actually spread the gospel to the Samaritans about Jesus. It's very interesting. Okay. So we have this understanding. So Samaritans are looked down upon because they were Israelites, right? So Samaria is the capital of the northern kingdom, and they were Israelites, right? That's Ephraim. That's the northern tribes, right? All 10 northern tribes are up in this area. They get conquered and destroyed by Assyria and brought into captivity. And part of the program for Assyria is that when you conquer a place, not only do you snatch everybody, bring them into exile, all the leaders, but then you send other people into that region to then repopulate and mix it all up and make it all confusing for that area so that they're easier to rule over in the future. So that's what happens. All these other people come in and basically mix with all the other 10 tribes. And so Samaritans aren't just people who went into exile, but they're now mixed with all the other Gentiles, all the other nations. And that's a problem for Jewish people who are told not to mix with the other nations. They're told to stay separate and become a people. And so that's why Samaritans in particular are looked down upon, because they're not just like Jews that aren't acting right. They're Jews that have been mixed and now are something else. So it's worse than a Gentile who was never called to do this thing that we're doing as Jews, right? It's like you were supposed to do this thing, but now we don't even know what to do with you. And plus they're much closer than all the other Gentiles. And so oftentimes you have a lot more problems with your next door neighbor than you do with the neighbor 3 blocks away, right? You're constantly interacting with them. If you don't see things eye to eye, that can be a problem. Okay. And so as we think about this relationship, what do authors and characters in the New Testament, how do they treat Gentiles, or what's the relationship with Gentiles and Samaritans? We already talked about the Good Samaritan a little bit.
And how did Jesus treat them?
Yeah, how does Jesus treat them? How does Paul think about Gentiles? Do they bring them up? Is it a topic in the New Testament much?
Well, the Roman centurion asked Jesus to say the word, and my servant will be healed. And Jesus said, I haven't found such a faith in all Israel.
Yeah. Yeah, so you would say that they're being elevated
Yes.
in some way? Okay. Anybody else have anything to say about the Gentiles in the New Testament?
I mean, even some of the prophets, apostles would, intentionally get those people, just to uphold them and speak positively about these groups.
Yeah. So Paul he gets this call that, I'm going to be sent to the Gentiles. So every town he goes to the synagogue first to try to get some friends, find some locals, and then he eventually gets kicked out of the synagogue, and then he has to go and start talking to all the Gentiles in there, all the non-Jews. Yeah.
The temple had a place for them
Mhm.
in the court. So they were, it's kind of a weird thing, because they welcomed them there, but they excluded them also.
Yeah. And that was part of the law, right? Is that they don't get to participate in the way that you participate. And even if they're circumcised, then there's still some sort of kind of distance that needs to be maintained, because they're not the same people.
And then in Jesus, when the lady came, and then, I don't remember the whole story, but she said even the dogs get the scraps. So he honored her for her faith.
Yeah, I was being a little facetious in asking, does anybody in the New Testament think about Gentiles? It's almost all they think about. It's almost every letter is almost just about this idea. How do we include the Gentiles in our thing? We've been doing this thing for 1,000 years. Now we're letting Gentiles in. What's that mean, and how do we do it? If you look through all the letters, it's a constant source of tension between these Christians as they bring in Gentiles. It's like, well, they don't eat the same things that we do. They don't do the same kinds of stuff, and they're at these temples and with idols, and like, how do we interact with them after they bring us this beautiful gift of meat that has been sacrificed to Zeus? Like, what do we do with that? And so that's what most of the letters are all about. It's like, how do we become this one people that formerly weren't one people? And if we continue to think about the stories with Jesus, a lot of his stories are about Gentiles strangely being very faithful and wanting to come and honor him and worship God. And so it's all about them coming into the fold and being brought into this new thing that's happening because of Jesus. And that's all post-exile. Hopefully we can see that the people of Israel were rightly concerned that they went into exile because of their apostasy and partnering with the Gentiles in a way that wasn't productive. And so they try to separate that out and try to and distance. And then, so when Jesus comes in and starts bringing all these people that aren't supposed to belong, are supposed to be separate, you can understand why there's so many concerns. It's like, well, how are we gonna continue to remain separate if we're bringing just, anybody in for any reason? That's what
Was
was
it, there was the rift between Paul and Peter, one wanted to just witness to the Jews and one everybody else, the Greeks.
Yeah, well, so Peter's the one who gets the vision that, oh yeah, get up, Peter, kill and eat, right? And so what was unclean is no longer unclean. You're meant to go out to the Gentiles and bring them in to this thing. And yet Peter still has troubles at certain points where it's like his Jewish buddies are coming into town, and it's like, okay, well, I'm gonna go over there and do Jewish stuff and exclude some Gentiles. And so there's continued tension as Paul is trying to show his understanding that yes, I'm Jewish and I'm going to bring in Gentiles, whatever it takes. I'm gonna continue to work in that way. Cool. All right. Let's get into a few passages today. I really want to get to the Lord's Supper. So I just got a few. We're going to kind of fly over at 40,000 feet and consider. So the first one, that maybe the most obvious, if you're thinking about Jesus' life of exile, is this idea that he has to go to Egypt. He has to leave his home and flee to Egypt because Herod is massacring the babies in his town. And so Herod takes on this role of Pharaoh, and so now Israel has become Egypt, and Herod the king is Pharaoh, and so he is the one that's killing these newborns. And this is portrayed in Matthew chapter 2. Turn over there. And in Matthew 2, in his gospel, Jesus is a new Moses, and so it makes sense that he tells us about this little story, unlike the other gospel authors, because he's trying to make these really tight connections to say, oh yeah, this happened as well for Jesus' life. He went down to Egypt, and then so like Moses, he's returning from this exile in Egypt to begin his life. Then it quotes Hosea 11:1 here, out of Egypt I called my son. And so it's just, again, making these connections that Jesus, not only is he embodying Moses' story, but it's also Israel's story itself. He's coming out of Egypt and starting this story over again, but hopefully in a more productive way. I think we already talked about this, but in John chapter 1, we have this passage, the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, or tabernacled among us. And so how does that idea relate to exile? Yeah.
His eternal and natural existence was dwelling in him. Forever though, the Godhead was changed when Jesus became flesh. And the earth for him, in my view, was an exile. It was a removal from his homeland, that being heaven, for a while to help redeem us so that we could long for that heavenly existence and go to be where he is forever.
Yeah, and then so this idea of tabernacling among us, or dwelling among us, how is that related to this exile theme that we've been talking about?
This is not our home, we're just pilgrims.
For Jesus.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's all right. So Jesus tabernacles, that's the word is, it's not the same word as tabernacle in Greek, but it's this idea of like dwelling in a tent. It's kind of the word there. And so how is that how is tabernacle related to exile?
So when they were coming in, they created the tabernacle. That was a place for God to dwell with them while they were en route to the promised land.
Yeah.
And so you could make that's a type of how Jesus dwells with us while we're en route to the promised land. Is that what?
So the tabernacle is the structure that's built before the temple, right? And so it's this temporary dwelling while they're in the wilderness, while they're getting ready to set up the temple.
I think
Yeah.
that sometimes we associate being close to God or like being like in the temple, like as close as we possibly can to like security, but maybe even just understanding that sometimes in those other areas that like it's the portability of the tabernacle, you know, that you can be in these other spaces of exile and learning to find God in those places.
Yeah, and so when Jesus returns, or Jesus comes to earth as a human in tabernacles, that's really good news, right? It's really good news that it's no longer the temple that's the only place of God's kind of compressed presence or holy presence. Now he's coming out into the world as a human, one, and he's calling us to be like that. And so it's hopefully we can see that it's this mobile presence of God that's hopefully bringing blessing and goodness into the world, for sure. Another couple things to mention is the idea of homelessness. So he says foxes have holes, birds have nests, some man has nowhere to lay his head. So he has this kind of itinerant ministry, and people are called to follow after him. Does that mean that we should be homeless? Is that what that's talking about? Why does Jesus call attention to this idea as a disciple saying that he wants to come and follow him? He says, well, I don't have a home. Are you good with that? How should we think about that as people who are in exile, but most of us aren't homeless?
Again, tied to like security, like what do you think are open, not material things like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like basic things, but we should be more focused that like we'll take care of those needs, we don't need those things to produce success in this life.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so a loose hold on our homes and the things that we have. We should not be grasping tightly on those, because if they're taken away, right? If they're gone in a flood or whatever it might be, then are we going to hold on to those and go into the flood with them, or are we going to let them go and trust that God's going to take care of us? What about spiritually? Spiritual home,
Can I read a message from Hebrews 11?
please.
All these died in faith without receiving the promises, but having seen them and having welcomed them from a distance, and having confessed that they were strangers and exiles on the earth. For those who say such things make it clear that they are seeking a country of their own. And indeed, if they had been thinking of that country from which they went out, they would have had an opportunity to return. But as it is, they desire a better country, that is, a heavenly one. Therefore, God is not ashamed to be called their God, for he has prepared a city for them. I think it's a beautiful passage that expresses the exilic life that God's people should live, longing for a heavenly home.
Absolutely.
And going to the original exile, traveling from the garden where they're dwelling with God, that's really where home should be. That's the day right now. This home came to this my head, but this world's not my home, it's just a passing through.
Mhm. Yeah, and so if we we loosely hold on to the physical things, we invest in the people around us, then when the trials come, when even if we lose people, right? If we are committed faithfully, then we know that this isn't the end of them, and that death doesn't get the final word. And so it isn't something that shakes us, but rather grounds us and makes us more resilient. I heard this podcast one time, and this guy was talking about, he was talking to an atheist in the podcast. They were having a very congenial discussion, just trying to kind of say, oh, how do you think about things? This is how I think about things. And the way the guy talked, he was being very kind to the atheist, but he talked about his faith. He's like, yeah, some days, I don't have a lot of faith, and it seems, like, I don't believe in these things and this and that. And then some days are better, and I do. And the atheist thought, oh wow, that's interesting. But for me, the longer I spend around Jesus and his people, even though we're not perfect and I make mistakes, other people make mistakes, like the more I spend in the Word, the more time I spend in the Word, it's like this description. That's kind of how I think about the Bible. It's this it's this description of reality that helps me live in the world, right? It helps me understand how I ought to be. And so, like every day I experience life, it just confirms more and more about it. So there's not like a thing I could hear, a scientific discovery or something, some fact that comes out about some historical event that would like shake my faith, because this is like, oh, this is just so tightly wound around reality. Like if I fight against this, I suffer, right? And the people around me suffer, and all of the things I do turn to ash in my hands. But when I'm aligned with God's will and His kingdom, then things thrive and things work out well. So it's like there's not like a piece of evidence that would change that, unless like I found out I'm like a crazy person in a straitjacket and I'm just dreaming all this. But like the point is that the longer I spend around God and His people and trying to dwell in His presence, I think the surer our faith becomes and the looser our hold becomes on our particular circumstance at any given time, because it's always going to change, it's always going to transform, and as long as we are remaining faithful, then we can be sure that it's going to transform, maybe not in this moment into something better, but surely in the future something better. The last thing I wanted to look at is the Passover meal and the Lord's Supper, because I think last week we talked about baptism and its relationship to the exile. Our other primary, I'm going to use the word ritual, that we do is the Lord's Supper, our communion meal. And I don't have an aversion to the word ritual. You can have empty rituals and you can have very meaningful rituals. And we have the most meaningful rituals. And so I think as long as you understand that there's a distinction there, thinking of them as rituals is helpful, because you also have rituals in your life that aren't helpful, right? If you go home and just watch Fox News or CNN for 8 hours a day, that's a ritual that you're doing, and it's doing something to you, right? It's transforming how you think about the world, and you're sitting at the feet of people who want you to think things and want you to do things. And it's not just that example, right? It's Facebook and TikTok. It's your sports teams. It's going to the mall, right? All these things are rituals that you're performing, and some of them are very materialistic. Some of them, but everything has a spiritual implication, right? All of our actions in our lives have some sort of end, and some of them might bring us closer to God. Some of us might bring us further away. Hopefully the important thing that you understand is that building the right kinds of rituals into your life will result in much more fruitfulness. And so that's one of the things that we're talking about in our next class, is like, how do we build these habits into our lives which bring about spiritual transformation, growth, and resilience, and how do we cut out some of the things that aren't doing those things, that are pointing at something else than God. And so as we think about the Passover, that's where I want us to go. So The Passover meal comes from Exodus 12. I want us to turn to Ezra chapter 6. We'll read a quick passage there. So they complete the temple, and then what do they do right after they complete the temple? Verse 19. Passover. No, you think it was just like a coincidence? They're like, oh look, we completed the temple, and now it's Passover. How lucky, how fortunate, right? It's very, very likely that they planned, it's like, okay, we haven't been building the temple, we need to get on it, let's get it done so that we can celebrate Passover on this day. And that's what they did, right? They committed to it, they got the funds, they completed Passover. The exiles held the Passover on the 14th month of the first month. For the priests and Levites had purified themselves together, all of them were pure, and they slaughtered the Passover lambs for all the exiles, both for their brothers and for the priests and for themselves, the sons of Israel who returned from exile, and all those who had separated themselves from the impurity of the nations of the land to join them to seek the Lord God of Israel ate the Passover. Okay. So how is Passover related to exile?
Well, first Passover was in Egypt, when God told him, avenge the angels going to come around with the blood of the lambs. Pharaoh says, like, next day, you're out of here. And they went into the desert, and they sinned, and God made them wander in the desert for 40 years, exile.
Yeah, so it's this idea of leaving, this hasty meal that we have to eat, that we remember that we were wanderers, that God pulled us out, formed us into a people, and brought us into the promised land. So it's all tied up into this exile story. And so as they return from their exile, right, so they're reflecting on these blessings and curses in Deuteronomy. They've just gone through the curses. They return, they rebuild the temple. The first thing they do is celebrate Passover. Right? It's this return from exile celebration meal. So then Jesus takes that ball and he runs with it. And so in Matthew 26, we read this almost every week. Matthew 26, get down to verse 26. Now while they were eating, Jesus took some bread, and after a blessing, he broke it, gave it to his disciples. He said, "Take, eat, this is my body." He's given the cup, and given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, "Drink from it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is being poured out for the forgiveness of sins. But I say to you, that I will not drink of this fruit of the vine from now until that day when I drink it with you new in my Father's kingdom." After singing a hymn, they went out to the Mount of Olives. So how is Jesus continuing to further this idea of exile in this celebration of the Passover and now the Lord's Supper?
He reminds us that our end goal is to do his kingdom as well, and to the earth, not in our final choice.
Yeah, it's sometimes we stop reading at verse 28, but verse 29 is beautiful, right? It's like we're gonna take this meal again with Jesus in God's kingdom for eternity. So it's a beautiful picture of feast and celebration at the end of these trials. It's like this is a tough word, right? That Jesus we're gonna eat his flesh and drink his blood. It's like that's not a super happy type of celebration that your host is offering to offer some of himself for your consumption. So it's like this is bringing all the storylines. Everything comes together into the meaning of this single ritual, and it's going to transform them into his people who are hopefully thinking of themselves as exiles, waiting to have this meal with him in eternity. That's all I have for today. Any last thoughts or questions?
I think that there's so many connections between Passover and